you can knit directly from a silk cocoon. The form you'll most likely find cocoons available for sale in is called a hankie. So I'm first going to show how cocoons can be stretched over a frame to produce either a hankie or a cap. And then I'll show you how to knit directly from the hankie or the cap. What you see here are a couple of cocoons that have been soaked in a solution of washing soda and a little bit of soap. And they've been simmered gently. And the reason for doing this is because you need to dissolve the saracen, which is the hard-like compound. It's a glue-like substance that gives the cocoon its rigidity, and that, of course, is what protects the developing moth from predators. But we have to get rid of that saracen in order to stretch the cocoon. So the washing soda and soap over heat have done that. So now I'm going to stretch each of these cocoons over a square wooden frame to create a hankie. And I start by keeping the cocoon underwater just because it's a little bit easier to get it started that way, and stretching the cocoon out. And you can see here as I pull it up out of the water, I'm starting to stretch it out, and you'll notice two things. You'll notice the body of the developing moth. In this stage, it's called the chrysalis. And you'll also see embedded in the silk another dark spot, and this is actually the last skin. The silkworm actually, in the course of developing into the moth, actually sheds its skin, just like a snake does. And the very last skin that's shed is seen right in the silk. It will drop out, and we can get rid of it once this silk cocoon has dried. But you can see I get it started underwater, and now I'm going to take the square frame, and I'm going to hook one corner over the corner of the frame here, and while I'm holding down on it, I'm going to stretch the silk out up to this other corner here, and then likewise stretch each of these corners over the respective corners of the wooden frame here. So here I've stretched one cocoon. Now I'll go back into my solution of washing soda. Well, actually at this point it's water because I've rinsed the washing soda and soap out. But I've gone back into the liquid, gotten this second silk cocoon ready for stretching. I'm going to pick out the silkworm's body, the pupa, or chrysalis as it's called at this stage, and discard that. And I'm going to stretch a second cocoon right on top of the first one, and again over this square frame. And I don't know whether you can get a sense of it from the video, but I'm pulling pretty tightly, pretty hard, because cocoon, or silk rather, is a very strong fiber. So here I've stretched two cocoons now over this wooden frame, and I would continue in this process until I've stretched 35 or 40 cocoons over this wooden frame, and then I'll allow it to dry. So once you have 35 or 40 cocoons stretched over a square frame, if you allow them to dry and then you dye them, this is typically then referred to as a hankie. A hankie is the most common form you'll find silk cocoons available for sale at either a sheep and wool festival, online, or at your local yarn shop. To work with an entire hankie at once is a little bit tough because silk is such a strong fiber, it's just not manageable. So to knit from a hankie, what you need to do is separate off a couple of cocoons at a time. And to do that, if we turn the hankie on its edge, you'll see ridges quite clearly. And what you'll do is find one ridge or two ridges, each ridge being the edge of one or two cocoons, and you'll gently start to work your way around the edge of the hankie, peeling back that one or two cocoons, or that one or two ridges that you have started to separate. And as you do that, you'll see that it's quite readily separates from the original bundle of hankies. Now, if your hands are at all dry, like mine are, you'll find that the silk catches on them. And one thing you can do to make it a little bit easier to work with is to either keep your hands moisturized or to keep some talcum powder nearby. So now that we have pulled off one cocoon, we need to get it into a form that we can readily knit from. So to do that, you're going to grasp the opposite corners of this hanky, and you're going to start pulling and tugging. And I don't know whether you can get a sense of this through the video or not, but I'm actually pulling quite hard, and that's because silk is a strong fiber, and it's also a very long fiber. So you can see how far apart my hands need to be in order to pull it apart. If my hands are too close, I get nowhere. So pull your hands a little bit further apart and just gradually work your way down the length of the hanky, tugging and pulling to separate the fibers into an even sized length of silk cocoon. To get an idea of what your yarn will be like when you knit with this, you can simply introduce a little bit of twist to this silk, and that will give you an idea of how thick or thin the yarn is that you'll be knitting with. So whether you leave it thick like this, which will give you more of a heavy worsted weight sort of gauge, or whether you pull your silk cocoon out to something much thinner to produce more of a fingering or lace weight yarn, is up to you. I recommend pulling out all of your hankies at once before you start to knit. But if you don't store them in some fashion, you'll end up with a mess of tangles. So what I do is, as I pull the hanky out, I collect it by winding it around a paper towel tube like this. That just keeps the hanky that I'm going to knit from sort of organized. So I'll continue to tuft out to the size that I want to knit with each of the individual cocoons in my hanky, and as I do that, I will wind them around a paper towel tube like this just to collect them and keep them organized until I'm ready to knit. You can see here that I've already started a little swatch of ribbing working from this silk cocoon. So I'm going to demonstrate how you knit from the silk cocoon that you've just stretched out and you have stored on this paper towel container, and how to change to a new cocoon when you get to the end of one. It's really just like changing to a new ball of yarn when you've finished the first ball you're working with. So here I've come to the end of this cocoon. I'm going to begin knitting with the next cocoon, and I've left a 2 to 3 inch tail of the first cocoon, and I'm going to add this new cocoon just as if it was a new skein of yarn. So I tend to leave the old tail, I loop the new yarn around, and I'll knit a couple of stitches. I don't usually knit two together just because I think it adds a little bit of bulk. So I'm just knitting with the new cocoon. After I've knit a couple of stitches, I will turn the piece around, and I will now go back with a crochet hook or a wool needle, and I will weave these two ends in. So you're going to treat this hanky just as you would a ball of yarn. The simple act of wrapping the hanky or the silk cocoon here around the needle is enough to introduce enough twist to hold this fabric together. And that's because silk is such a long fiber and such a strong fiber that it doesn't need a lot of twist to have integrity. But you can see how lovely and lustrous the fabric is when you knit from a silk cocoon, because silk has such beautiful sheen. And of course, if you're working from a hand-dyed hanky, as we are here, you get beautiful subtle variation of color.